My name is Christopher Fu, and I'm an economist that is working in the Davison Group. And if you're here watching this video, it means you have found your way to my booth in the Australian Conference of Economists. I hope you learned a lot from my presentation in terms of possibly developing more interest in economics in general, but I will now present my latest findings on the effects of tax on the economy and the implications it can potentially bring. First off, we should define what is consumer surplus and what is producer surplus. Consumer surplus is the difference between the willingness of the consumers to pay for a product and the price they actually pay to get the good. This shows the benefit of surplus that consumers receive from buying an item at a lower price. Meanwhile, producer surplus is defined as the difference between the minimum price at which producers are willing to sell a product and the actual price they receive or sell it for. Conversely, this again displays the benefits or surplus that producers acquire from selling their products at a higher price. Taxes hurt both consumers and producers, and their welfare by reducing their respective surplus of economic benefits, and causing less gains from trade from being realized in both the buyers and sellers side. This directly affects market efficiency in a negative manner, in which markets do best when the total surplus, or the sum of consumer and producer surplus, are maximized. In the diagram, you can see that there has been a shift to the left in the supply curve, and a decrease in the quantity demanded, which is partly due to a visible tax wedge, founded on the basis of an introduction of a tax policy. This tax wedge indicates that the price of a product that needs to be paid by consumers has increased, which can be seen in the rise of P1 to P2, while the price received by producers has decreased, which can be seen in the descent from P1 to P3. The consumer's welfare is also hit by the fact that their purchasing power has also decreased due to the spike in prices, and producers will experience lower profit margins because of taxes. As a rule of thumb, the wider the tax wedge is, the greater the reduction in consumer surplus and producer surplus. It may sound like I am repeating myself, but it is important to remember. In case you do not know, in the diagram, the tax wedge can be seen as the gap between P2 and P3, which also indicates the total tax revenue. Additionally, when the government implements tax, deadweight loss comes with it, in which it can be highlighted in the big triangle situated in the middle of the two supply curves, and the demand curve. Deadweight loss constitutes the loss of economic welfare or potential gains from consumer or producer surpluses due to market distortions such as tax. Deadweight loss gives us a picture regarding the scope of the effects of certain tax policies on certain goods. How taxes impact aggregate demand and aggregate supply. What I have just explained can be extended into the pools of macroeconomics, where the economy as a whole is taken into account. I am going to define the key terms again very briefly. Aggregate demand is known as the total demand for all goods and services in an economy, while aggregate supply can be separated into two categories: short run and long run supply. Long run aggregate supply is seen as a level of output produced when the economy is at the natural rate of unemployment within a time period sufficient for having all prices adjust, or it is at full employment output, while a short-term aggregate supply is the same thing, but when it is in a period of time in which some prices have not yet adjusted. Taxes indirectly affects aggregate demand by affecting the level of disposable income for consumers. A rise in tax rates will decrease the average disposable income of households, thus shifting the aggregate demand curve to the left, which signifies a decrease in the nation's total output and a decrease in price levels due to decreased consumer spending and low demand, as people cannot afford to purchase as much, in which businesses have to cope by lowering their own prices to keep the demand for the goods up, which controls inflation. Unemployment rates will also skyrocket, and the reduced investments due to taxes also lowers aggregate demand. Eventually, the lower price levels could rebound and induce a higher aggregate quantity demanded due to more affordability. Taxes can shift the long-run aggregate supply to the left, meaning that a country produces less at full employment because taxes can institutionally change a nation's ability to produce their outputs. This can be due to the high taxes on salaries that turn people off from labor. This lack of an incentive results in a low labor supply, which affects the production of goods. It can be broken if advancements and investments in capital are made. Just like the long-run aggregate supply, the short-run aggregate supply is also hit by the impact of rising tax rates, which would result in a shift to the left as well, or simply put, a decrease in the quantity of aggregate supply in the short run, possibly due to the production costs dealt by the taxes and reduced profitability. Could a tax that improves people's health have any potential long-term benefits for the economy? An example of a tax that both improves overall health and brings economic benefits is a fat tax. What is a fat tax? A fat tax is a tax that is imposed upon foods that are deemed unhealthy. The hike in prices affects both sellers and buyers, as they both would have to share the burden of paying off the fat tax, because the tax will always lead to an increase in price for the buyers, regardless of whom the taxes are levied to. A tax of this form improves people's health by incentivizing the populace to reduce the intake of fatty foods with a lower purchasing power and lower aggregate demand, being reasons, and long-term benefits for the economy can come from this. A positive supply shock can be caused by a fat tax, which shifts the aggregate supply curve to the right. Due to more healthy eating habits being encouraged, less healthy issues will be experienced and a healthier workforce is assimilated, which can lead to more productive labor and reduce absenteeism, and thus lead to higher predicted outputs and long-term economic growth. Also, at first, in the short term, the price levels would increase, but in the long term, price stability would be achieved due to healthcare costs being decreased as the rates for obesity-related diseases would decrease and thus less costly treatments need to be performed. Along with taxes, increasing human capital, which enhances workforce productivity and quality due to improved overall health, governments could take advantage of the mentioned reduced healthcare costs to free up resources and raise revenues that could be better allocated to other productive sectors of the economy, such as infrastructure and education. And so, at the end of the run, economic growth is always attained. How can we use an empirical econometric model to assess the health and economic growth consequences of a fat tax? To further expand upon the topic of fat taxes, we need to use econometrics, which is a study that uses statistical methods to describe causal relationships between variables. In this case, we want to better understand the true effects of a so-called fat tax, such as the health and economic growth consequences that come with it, with the use of the empirical econometric model. We first start the process of this model by identifying the variables in the equation in the DAG graph, with the fat tax being the independent variable, while the fastest obesity rates of diabetes, GDP, and employment rates could be the dependent variables. Confounders such as socioeconomic factors have to be controlled and kept constant, considering richer people would be more likely to ignore the increase in prices due to fat taxes in order to purchase their desired goods and foods. Taking this confounder into account for the empirical model helps to absorb the negative relationship in order to discover the true effects of the fat tax. Afterwards, in the second step, we need to collect data on the listed variables such as health data and stats from hospitals and public or private databases, and data from economic reports. In the first step, we then proceed to create the econometric model using STATA, which involves a regression analysis. This model will possibly need to be converted into a graph and estimated using statistical methods, such as confidence intervals. When we decipher the results and make conclusions, we can find ourselves now being able to determine the statistical and economic significance of the said results, be able to define the relationship between the fat tax and the respective health and economic variables, or in other words, evaluate the impact of the fat tax on health outcomes and economic growth. For instance, if found a negative relationship between diabetes and fat taxes is linked to a decrease in health-related issues caused by obesity. That is all for today. I hope you all enjoyed yourselves and have learned more about general economics. Hopefully, we can come back next year at the ACE to demonstrate more of our research. Thank you again.